There's a version of your life that's been waiting for you. You can feel it. You've been able to feel it for a while now. This sense that something fuller, something truer, something with actual weight and texture is sitting just beyond where you currently stand. And you keep almost reaching it. You keep getting close. Then something pulls you back, and you can't always name what it is, but it feels like a hand on your ankle every time you try to step forward. Carl Jung spent most of his career studying people in exactly this position. People who had done the inner work. People who had faced their shadows, grieved their old selves, dismantled the stories that kept them small. People who were, by every psychological measure, ready for a richer life. And yet, they stayed frozen at the threshold. Something unnamed held them in place, and Jung became obsessed with understanding what that something was. What he found was a single undelivered message, a truth that lives in the body of every person who's done real psychological work but hasn't yet stepped into the life that work was supposed to create. A truth so simple, it almost sounds like nothing when you hear it. But Jung watched this one realization move people from years of stuckness into lives they barely recognized. He watched it work like a key in a lock that everyone had been trying to pick with increasingly complex tools. Today I'm going to give you that message the way Jung understood it. I'm going to show you why you've been stuck at the edge of the life you've been building toward, what's actually keeping you there, and what shifts, sometimes overnight, when this particular truth finally lands somewhere deeper than your intellect. Here's the pattern Jung kept seeing. Someone would come into his practice broken open by life, a marriage that ended them, a career that hollowed them out, a family system that finally became unbearable. And they'd do the work, genuinely. They'd face the shadow material, the rage, the grief, the parts of themselves they'd spent decades hiding. They'd sit with the discomfort of realizing how much of their life had been built on foundations that were never theirs to begin with. They'd let relationships fall away. They'd let identities dissolve. They'd endure the terrifying emptiness that comes after you've stripped away everything false and haven't yet built anything true. And then they'd arrive at a strange place, a place where the old life was clearly over. They could feel that in their bones. But the new life hadn't started. They were standing in the gap, the in-between. And Jung noticed that people could stay in this gap for months, sometimes years, sometimes the rest of their lives. They'd describe it the same way, almost word for word. I've done the work. I know who I am now. I understand my patterns. I've let go of what needed to go. So why does my life still look like this? Why am I still here? Jung recognized that the gap wasn't a failure of effort. These people had worked harder on themselves than most humans ever will. The gap was a failure of permission. Something inside them, something deep, something pre-verbal, something installed long before they had language to question it, was refusing to let them receive what they'd cleared space for. And this is where Jung's message begins. He found that the people stuck at the threshold almost always shared a specific psychological architecture. Somewhere in childhood, they'd received a lesson, not through words usually, but through the texture of daily life, that abundance was dangerous, that having too much invited punishment, that visible joy made you a target, that if life got too good, something terrible would follow to balance it out. This wasn't superstition, though it often wore superstition's clothes. It was survival programming. The child who got excited about something and watched it get taken away. The child who expressed happiness and saw a parent's face darken with envy or resentment. The child who learned that the safest emotional position was slightly below okay, because okay was manageable, but good was exposed. Good meant you had something to lose. Good meant someone might notice and decide you didn't deserve it. Jung saw this pattern repeat with eerie consistency. The adults who couldn't step into rich lives weren't lacking courage or insight or readiness. They were obeying an ancient instruction their nervous system had never updated. The instruction said, stay small, stay careful, stay just uncomfortable enough that you don't attract attention. Because attention, in your original environment, meant danger. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because most people who carry this programming don't know they carry it. They think they want abundance. They visualize it, plan for it, work toward it. But their body, their actual nervous system, has a different agenda. Their body learned decades ago that expansion equals threat. So every time they approach the threshold of a genuinely rich life, their system activates the old protocol. Anxiety appears from nowhere. Self-sabotage kicks in with surgical precision. They pick a fight, miss a deadline, get sick at exactly the wrong moment, make the one decision that pulls them back from the edge, and then they blame themselves. They think they're broken or lazy or fundamentally incapable of sustaining good things. But Jung would say something very different. He'd say, "Your system is working perfectly. It's protecting you from what it still believes is dangerous. The problem is that it's protecting you from a danger that no longer exists, using a map of the world that was drawn when you were 5 years old." This is the first layer of the message. Your stuckness at the threshold is loyalty. Loyalty to an old understanding of safety. Loyalty to a version of reality where staying small kept you alive. And that loyalty made sense once. It was brilliant, actually. A child's genius-level adaptation to an environment where visibility was punished. But you're not in that environment anymore. And the loyalty that once saved you is now the thing that's keeping you from the life you've already earned the right to live. Jung went deeper than this, though. He found a second layer that was harder to face. The people stuck at the threshold weren't just afraid of external punishment for having a rich life. They were afraid of who they'd become if they actually stepped into one. Because stepping into abundance, real abundance, the kind that includes emotional richness, creative expression, genuine intimacy, material ease, psychological freedom, requires becoming someone their original family system would not recognize. And that, Jung discovered, was the deeper terror. The sense that fully inhabiting a rich life meant completing a separation that part of them was still refusing to make. The final, irreversible separation from the world they came from. Jung would have called this the individuation threshold, the point where becoming yourself and belonging to your origin can no longer coexist, where the person you're becoming and the system that shaped you diverge so completely that stepping forward means accepting you can never fully go back. You can visit, you can love the people there, but you can't live in that world anymore because you've outgrown its dimensions. And some part of you, a loyal, grief-stricken, exhausted part, has been standing at the threshold, refusing to complete that separation. This isn't about cutting people off. Jung was clear about that. Individuation isn't rejection of where you came from. It's the completion of a psychological birth that started when you began questioning the family story, the cultural story, the inherited story about who you were supposed to be and what you were supposed to want. You've been in labor with yourself for years, and now the birth is ready to complete. But completing it means being fully, irreversibly born into your own life. And that carries a grief that most personal development frameworks skip right over. Because here's what nobody tells you about stepping into a rich life. You will grieve. You'll grieve the simplicity of the old world, even if the old world was painful. You'll grieve the version of yourself who fit there. You'll grieve the relationships that can't follow you. You'll grieve the comfort of being small, because smallness, for all its suffering, was familiar. And familiar has a gravity that abundance doesn't, especially when your nervous system was calibrated in scarcity. Jung didn't see this grief as a problem. He saw it as the price of admission. The doorway to a rich life passes through grief the way a river passes through a gorge. There's no way around it, only through. And the people who got stuck at the threshold were often people who sensed this grief waiting and unconsciously decided they'd rather stay in the gap than feel it. But here's what Jung also found. The grief is finite. It has a bottom. It has an end. And people who let themselves feel it, who stopped running from the sorrow of outgrowing their origins, moved through it faster than they expected. Weeks, sometimes. A few months of genuine mourning for the world they were leaving behind. And then, something opened. What opened, Jung observed, was capacity. Psychological capacity for receiving what had always been available but couldn't land. Like a harbor that had been blocked by debris. Once the grief cleared the channel, life could actually dock. Opportunities that had been circling started to land. Relationships that matched the new frequency appeared. Creative energy that had been locked in the service of staying small redirected into building something real. The richness they'd been approaching for years could finally reach them because they'd stopped unconsciously blocking it. And this is where the message sharpens into something you can actually use. Jung would tell you, and this is as close to his direct framework as I can put it, that you have been mistaking preparation for arrival. You've been doing the inner work, accumulating insight, developing awareness, and assuming that at some point the work itself would deliver you into the rich life, as if enough shadow integration would automatically produce abundance, as if enough therapy sessions would eventually generate the life you want without you having to do something that feels fundamentally different from everything you've done so far. The work was necessary, every bit of it. You needed to dismantle the false structures, face the shadow, grieve the old identity, understand your patterns. All of that cleared the ground. But clearing ground and building on it are different acts. And the second act requires something the first act doesn't: a willingness to receive without having earned the right to receive through additional suffering. This is where it gets uncomfortable for people who've built their identity around doing the hard work, because the hard work, at a certain point, becomes its own form of avoidance. If you're always processing, always healing, always in the next phase of inner transformation, you never have to face the terrifying simplicity of just allowing good things, allowing ease, allowing a life that isn't organized around your wound. Jung saw this constantly. Patients who had become so identified with the journey of healing that healing itself became the cage. They knew how to suffer productively. They knew how to face hard truths. They knew how to sit with discomfort. What they didn't know, what their entire system resisted, was how to sit with genuine goodness without waiting for the other shoe to drop. If that resonates with something you've been carrying, this sense of being caught between the life you've outgrown and the one you can almost touch, there's a set of reflection exercises in our guide, True Self-Discovery, that might help you close that gap. 24 of them, built around Jung's framework, designed to help you find your way within, especially when within feels like standing in a doorway you can't quite walk through. Click below to get it. So here is Jung's message, the one he would have given you if you'd sat across from him in that study in Kusnacht, with the lake outside and the books piled everywhere, and told him you'd done the work but couldn't cross the threshold. He would have said, "You are not waiting for readiness. You are ready. You have been ready. What you're waiting for is a guarantee that the rich life won't be taken from you the way good things were taken from you before, and that guarantee will never come. It cannot come, because life doesn't offer guarantees of permanence. What life offers, what the self offers if you'll let it, is the experience of fullness right now, today, in this body, with these resources, alongside these people, in this imperfect and temporary and astonishing window of being alive. The rich life you've been approaching isn't a reward for suffering enough. It isn't something you earn by completing one more phase of healing. It's something you allow by making a decision your nervous system has been refusing to make. The decision that you are allowed to have this. That joy is safe. That abundance is survivable. That your life is permitted to be good without catastrophe following close behind. Jung watched people make this decision. It rarely looked dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it was a person finally saying yes to a relationship their body had been screening out. Sometimes it was someone raising their prices, or moving to the city they'd been dreaming about, or simply stopping the constant self-improvement long enough to enjoy what they'd already built. The external form varied endlessly, but the internal shift was always the same. A moment where the old loyalty to smallness released its grip, and the person stepped forward into a life their childhood self would have found unimaginable. And here's what happened after. Jung documented this carefully because it mattered to him. The people who crossed the threshold didn't become different people. They became more themselves. The qualities that had been compressed by years of survival, their humor, their creativity, their warmth, their fierceness, their strange and specific way of seeing the world, expanded to fill the space that fear had been occupying. They didn't become spiritual archetypes or enlightened beings. They became vivid, particular, fully inhabited humans. Humans who laughed more than they expected to, who built things that surprised them, who attracted people and circumstances that matched the frequency they'd been too afraid to broadcast. The richness Jung was talking about was never primarily financial, though financial ease was often part of it. The richness was experiential, sensory, relational, creative. It was the richness of waking up in a life that actually fits you, where your daily existence reflects your inner reality instead of contradicting it, where you don't spend every evening recovering from a day that violated your values, where the people around you see you, actually see you, and you don't have to perform a version of yourself to maintain the connection. That's the rich life. And it's been waiting for you to stop believing you need one more breakthrough before you deserve it. But Jung would also warn you about something, because he was honest like that. He'd warn you that the first weeks of a rich life feel wrong. Your nervous system, calibrated for struggle, will interpret ease as danger. You'll feel anxious when things go well. You'll look for the hidden threat in good news. You'll catch yourself creating problems because problems feel familiar and you know how to navigate them, while happiness is uncharted territory that makes you feel exposed. This is normal. It's the nervous system catching up with the psychological shift you've made, and the only way through it is repetition. Repeated experiences of good things that don't end in punishment. Repeated moments of ease that don't collapse into catastrophe. Repeated evidence that your body can eventually accept what your mind already knows, that you're allowed to be here, in the rich life, living it, every day. Jung compared this to a plant that's been growing in a dark room suddenly being placed in sunlight. The plant doesn't immediately thrive. It wilts a little first. The intensity of what it's been reaching for its entire existence is, initially, overwhelming. But the plant doesn't need to go back to the dark room. It needs to stay in the light long enough for its biology to adapt. And then it doesn't just recover, it becomes what it was always capable of becoming. You've been in the dark room. You've done the extraordinary, lonely, often brutal work of growing in conditions that weren't designed for your flourishing. And now the light is available. The door is open. The rich life is right there. And every cell in your body that learned to associate darkness with safety is telling you to hesitate, to wait, to make sure, to do one more round of preparation. Jung's message is, stop preparing, start living. The readiness you're waiting to feel is something that only develops after you've stepped through the door, never before. You don't feel ready and then move. You move and then discover you were ready all along. Every person Jung watched cross this threshold said the same thing afterward. I could have done this sooner. And he'd smile because he knew. He'd been telling them. There's one more piece of this, and it might be the most important part. Jung recognized that stepping into a rich life is, at its core, an act of faith. And he didn't mean religious faith. He meant psychological faith, trust in the self, in the deeper organizing intelligence of your own psyche that has been guiding you through every dark night and every painful dismantling towards something you couldn't see while you were in it. The shadow work, the grief, the identity deaths, the relationships that ended, the ground that dissolved beneath you. All of it was preparation for this. All of it was clearing space for a life that required more room than your old structures could provide. Jung would have called this trusting the individuation process. Trusting that the intelligence driving your transformation knows where it's taking you, even when you can't see the destination from where you're standing. You've trusted it through the hard parts, through the nights you weren't sure you'd survive, through the losses that felt unsurvivable, through the phases where you couldn't recognize yourself in the mirror. You trusted it then. Trust it now. Trust it into the good. Because the good is where the process has been taking you. The dismantling was never the point. The point was always what could be built once the false structures were gone. You focused so intently on the demolition, understandably, because demolition is loud and consuming, that you forgot construction was supposed to follow. The rich life isn't a fantasy you're chasing. It's the natural consequence of everything you've already done. The harvest of seeds you planted in the darkest seasons of your transformation. Jung's one last message, distilled to its essence, is this. You have permission. You've had it longer than you know. The universe, or the self, or whatever name feels true to you, is not keeping score. It is not waiting for you to earn enough suffering points before releasing you into joy. The door has been open. You've been standing in front of it, hand on the frame, telling yourself you need one more thing before you can walk through. You don't need one more thing. You need to walk through. And the life on the other side, the full, textured, imperfect, abundant, breathing life that's been assembling itself while you were doing the inner work. It's going to feel strange at first. It's going to feel too good. Your body will resist it. Your old programming will generate doubt. And you'll have moments where you want to retreat to the familiar territory of working on yourself because at least that felt productive. At least that had structure. At least you knew the rules. Stay anyway. Stay in the new life. Let your nervous system recalibrate. Let the unfamiliar become familiar. Let ease stop feeling dangerous. Let people love you without assuming they'll leave. Let money flow without bracing for scarcity. Let creativity move through you without judging every output. Let your days be shaped by desire instead of duty, by curiosity instead of survival, by the genuine interests of the person you've become, rather than the desperate needs of the person you used to be. Jung believed, and his life's work supported this, that every human psyche is oriented toward wholeness, that the same force driving a seed to break through concrete is driving you toward your fullest expression. You've felt that force. It's what pulled you into the shadow work, the hard conversations, the identity collapses, the terrifying honesty. It wasn't punishing you, it was making room. The room is made now, the clearing exists. And standing in a clearing you've spent years creating while refusing to build anything in it, that's the only real waste. Everything else was necessary. The pain was necessary. The confusion was necessary. The long season of in-between was necessary. But its time is over. You know it's over. You've known for a while. So here it is. Jung's one last message, the one truth that unlocks the door you've been standing in front of. You survived the worst of your life with half your resources and none of your awareness. Imagine what becomes possible now that you have both. The rich life was never about arriving somewhere new. It was about finally letting yourself inhabit the place your transformation has already brought you. You're here. You've been here. The only thing left is to stop leaving. Stay. If you haven't yet, there's a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's teachings that was built for exactly this threshold, for the moment when the work is done and the living is what's left, for the moment when you need help staying in the light after years of growing in the dark. Click below to get it.